Let us start by recalling Wilson's theorem, and then ask what happens if we look only at half of the factorial.
I remember that Wilson's theorem talks about the product of all non-zero residues modulo a prime.
Here is Wilson's theorem in its usual form, saying that the product of all non-zero numbers modulo p is congruent to -1 when p is prime. In this lecture, we will focus on odd primes, so we write p as 2n plus 1. That means p minus 1 equals 2n, and the product 1 up to n, that is n factorial, forms the first half of the big factorial.
So we are basically zooming in on the first half of the Wilson product.
Our goal is to understand the square of n factorial modulo p and to see how it is secretly encoded in Wilson's theorem.
So instead of the whole factorial, we are trying to read off the behavior of just its middle square.
Next, we will test this idea with small primes to see what pattern the square of n factorial seems to follow. Let us look at some concrete numbers to see what n factorial squared might do modulo small primes. For the prime 7n is 3, and 3 factorial squared turns out to be congruent to 1 modulo 7. For the prime 11, n is 5, and 5 factorial squared also lands on 1 modulo 11.
So in both of these examples, the square of n factorial behaves like a perfect square of 1 modulo the prime.
Both small primes we tested give the same outcome. N factorial squared is congruent to 1. The natural question is whether this is just a coincidence for 7 and 11, or whether there is a clean formula that works for every odd prime.
Given how often patterns in number theory turn out to be real, I am guessing there is a general congruence hiding here.
To uncover the pattern, we will go back to Wilson's theorem and split the big factorial into 2 matching halves. Now we use the fact that p is odd to cut the Wilson factorial exactly in half. Because p equals 2n plus 1, p minus 1 equals 2n, and we can write the big product as numbers up to n times numbers from n plus 1 up to 2n. We start by encoding that p is odd using p equals 2n plus 1. The first half of the product is just all the positive integers from 1 up to n, whose product is n factorial. The second half runs from n plus 1 to 2n, and this is the part that will turn into something like the first half, but with signs.
So the second half contains exactly as many terms as the first half.
Now comes the key observation. Each number in the second half is congruent modulo p to a negative number from minus n up to minus 1.
So we can think of the second half as the same set as the first half, but reflected to their negative partners.
To make this matching of positives and negatives feel concrete, let us walk through it for the small prime 7. Let us test the splitting idea in the concrete case p equals 7. For p equal to 7, we have n equal to 3, so the non-zero residues are 1 through 6. We split the list into 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6 as the 2 halves of the product.
So 3 factorial comes from multiplying the first half, and the second half gives another block of 3 numbers.
Now, notice that 4 behaves like -3, 5 like -2, and 6 like -1 modulo 7. This line summarizes the matching each element of the second half is paired with a negative version of an element from the first half.
So multiplying 4, 5, 6 is the same as multiplying -3, -2, -1, only with an overall sign change.
This example suggests that in general the second half of the product is a signed copy of the first half, and now we will write that down algebraically. Using the negative partners, we can now express the product of the second half in terms of n factorial. First, each term n plus k in the second half is congruent to a negative number, so the whole second half product is congruent to the product of those negatives. Multiplying n negative numbers contributes a factor of -1 raised to the n, and the remaining absolute values multiply to n factorial.
So the second half is just n factorial with an overall sign that depends on whether n is even or odd.
Every term in the second half has a partner among minus n up to -1, so there is a 1-to-1 matching between these lists. Because there are exactly n terms in the second half, multiplying them gives a sign of -1 to the n. Putting this together, the second half of the Wilson product is congruent to -1 to the n times n factorial.
That means both halves of the factorial are now expressed in terms of n factorial, which sounds perfect for forming a square.
Next, we will plug this expression into the full product and combine it with Wilson's theorem to get the Factorial-Square identity. Now we combine the splitting of the factorial with Wilson's theorem itself. Viewing the full product as first half times second half and substituting our expression for the second half, we get that the factorial of p minus 1 is congruent to negative 1 to the n times n factorial squared. But Wilson's theorem also tells us that the same factorial of p minus 1 is congruent to negative 1 modulo p.
So we now have two different congruences for the same quantity.
Equating the two expressions and multiplying both sides by negative 1 to the n, we arrive at the key identity that n factorial squared is congruent to negative 1 to the power n plus 1 modulo p. The splitting argument converts the whole factorial into n factorial squared times a sign depending on n. Combining that with Wilson's theorem produces what we can call the twin identity connecting n factorial squared directly to a simple power of negative 1.
So all the complexity of the product from 1 up to 2n has collapsed into a neat sign pattern built from n.
Now let us see what this tells us about when negative 1 is a square modulo a prime. Let us interpret the identity in terms of quadratic residues and revisit our examples. Here is our main result again, relating n factorial squared to a simple power of negative 1 when p equals 2n plus 1. When n is odd, n plus 1 is even, so the right side becomes positive 1, matching what we saw for p equal to 7 and 11.
That explains why both 3 factorial squared modulo 7 and 5 factorial squared modulo 11 gave 1.
When n is even, the exponent n plus 1 is odd, so the right side becomes negative 1. And notice that in this case, p is congruent to 1 modulo 4. So whenever p is congruent to 1 modulo 4, our identity shows that negative 1 is actually a square modulo p. In fact, in that situation, n factorial itself is a square root of negative 1 modulo p, because n factorial squared gives negative 1.
So Wilson's twin not only gives a neat identity, it also hands us an explicit square root of negative 1 whenever it exists.
Let us finish by testing the case p equals 13, which should fall into this pattern. Time for a quick check to see if you can drive the identity yourself. For p equal to 13, we have 2n plus 1 equal to 13, so n is 6, and our identity says that 6 factorial squared is congruent to negative 1 to the power 7 modulo 13.
Negative 1 to the 7th power is just negative 1, so 6 factorial squared is congruent to negative 1 modulo 13.
Exactly, so without expanding any factorials, we have the answer. 6 factorial squared is congruent to negative 1 modulo 13. Now think about the interpretation, because 6 factorial squared gives negative 1 modulo 13. Negative 1 is a quadratic residue, and 6 factorial is a square root of negative 1.
So for primes congruent to 1 modulo 4, Wilson's twin identity not only tells us that negative 1 is a square, it tells us that n factorial is one of its square roots.
Wilson's theorem keeps giving from primality tests to square roots of negative 1, so keep exploring these classical identities and their hidden twins.